Willow. Chapter 9. The secret ingredient is hate. Have you ever been to a proper haunting? I'm not talking about getting together with friends, grabbing a Ouija board, and asking ghosts if the school quarterback thinks you're cute. Nor am I talking about getting your buddies to visit the abandoned apartment complex down the block to take photos of dust motes and call those orbs. Even the very real, very supernatural encounters I've had with Gary Remington were far more sightings than hauntings. The ghosts of dead hockey players at the Anthony Gillade Memorial Arena last year, now that was a haunting. You see, it's not just the ghosts that make a good haunt. It's the threat, the mystery, and the inevitable and unfinished business. There's no mystery to Gary Remington. He passed away in the spring 2 years ago. He suffered from insomnia and enjoyed some orange honey poppy seed cake with a glass of warm milk to help him sleep. While alive, Gary split his time doing philanthropic work and research. His passions ranged from archaeology to literature and all sorts of other quirky academic ambitions. Between that and the occasional round of golf with friends, he truly did live the life of the rich and retired. The only unfinished business I know Gary Remington to have had was not enough time spent with his wife Julia. That's been remedied with the help of my cakes, or rather Doris's cakes that I've adopted. That leaves being a threat. Gary has never been a threat. Even in the afterlife, his apparition is that of a thin, nebbish man who wears a cardigan and wire-frame glasses. There's nothing threatening about him. Or at least, there wasn't. Ever since I met Thomas Sinclair, host of the Stranger Limits podcast, I've been bothered by him. He's loud and obnoxious. Everything about him takes up room. His voice takes over conversations. His unwavering certainty and conviction steamrolls over other people's ideas and opinions. He's not unfriendly, and I suppose that's how he navigates through life without being murdered, but he remains so very, very annoying. And I think Gary agrees, or rather, the ghost of Gary. If the love he felt for Julia transcended death, then so does his impatience for meddlers and those who lack decorum. Intolerance for people like Thomas Sinclair, who, out of impatience and a lack of concern, decided to take a peek inside the cake box. It's a good thing that I'm a gourmet. I'm trained to perceive multiple facets of a meal. I can love the texture of a cake while still recognizing the flavor profile isn't quite there. I can pick up on when a pie is underbaked, even though it's a visual feast. And that's how I can be simultaneously amused with Thomas Sinclair's reaction to having all his dreams come true, how his awe is consumed by terror and his eyes look about to fall from their sockets, the sheen of sweat that instantly materialized on his forehead as he claws his way backwards, trying to escape the apparition. Yet still be devastated at knowing that now he has material for his podcast that will put Willow on the map. Oh, and there is the issue of the angry ghost of Gary Remington. In fact, the humor of the situation evaporates like so many ephemeral dreams. As Thomas backpedals, crashing into piles of newspapers and books, his flashlight waves around as if he thought it was a sword with which to bat away the apparition. He finally trips over, falling flat on his back and dropping his weapon, leaving us both in complete darkness. And it sinks in. I don't know anything. Like an animal trainer who's become too comfortable around the big cats, I've forgotten that I don't know what's going on behind Gary's translucent eyes. I've been feeding this ghost, luring it to the world of the living so that Julia can spend time with her husband, but I don't know anything about it. And so little about Gary Remington, for that matter. I've seen what the angry, restless dead are capable of, but I don't know what makes them tick. Why are they here? Where did the other deceased go? I hate to say it, but my mind goes back to some of the offbeat explanations I heard Thomas Sinclair vomit a while back, and I've no reason to think any of them are right or wrong. "Gary?" I ask, my voice weak with suffocated dread. I stand and put my hands up, showing my palms, showing that I mean no harm. I might as well be the animal trainer again, hoping to calm a raging tiger with but soothing words and slow gestures. Does he see a threat? A victim? A meal? "Gary, it's Miriam Dufour," I say, trying to make my voice an authority but also non-threatening. I'm not sure it's working. "I'm Doris's great-grandniece. You knew Doris, right?" The apparition is standing now, with the flashlight on the floor and darkness enveloping us. His features are so much easier to see. Gone is the gentle, loving smile and caring eyes that cast their benign gaze on Julia. Instead, the glowing apparition burns with anger, its face contorted to look barely human. His very form seems in flux. The edge of his shape lacks the placid stability of past encounters. Instead, Gary looks consumed by liquid flame, endlessly pulling at his body and clothes but without consuming them. I make the cakes now. I brought the cake." Finally, I have his attention. Gary turns from Thomas. Like an insect, he's crawled over the top of his desk. It's difficult to say what is physical to him and what isn't, but those are musings for a different time. Spider-like, the apparition moves in my direction, snarling and baring teeth too long and too sharp to have been those of his living host. His face is stretched and his jaw dislocated. I can see a tear in his cardigan and a stain on the shirt underneath. A blot of maroon seeping into the white fabric. It looks a bit like a map of France, but I know it's blood. The ethereal signature of the man's death. Something's not right. Either this isn't Gary or there's something I'm missing. His jaw, as unhinged as his eyes, is mere inches from me, pushing me back to sit on the chair from which I've just risen. He's going to bite, and despite all my fears, I can't help but wonder, what will the teeth of a ghost feel like? "Back, foul demon!" Gary's ethereal head snaps at the shout, looking back over his shoulder at an angle that would have broken the neck of a living man. Thomas Sinclair, like a knight in polyester armor, stands behind the apparition. He's picked up his flashlight, holding it in a firm grasp to light the ceiling. With his other hand, he brandishes a wooden ruler, intersecting the light to make the shape of a cross. His plump features and unshaven blonde beard are picked up by the light, giving the podcaster an almost ghostly halo of his own. Gary, or whatever it is the spirit of Gary Remington has become, shifts its crawl, contorting itself to move towards Thomas. This thing no longer looks like Julia's deceased husband. It has instead become a creature of nightmare, more beast than man. Is this what Julia had to contend with while waiting for me to figure out Doris's recipe? No wonder the nights took years off her life. Emboldened by his meager success, Thomas steps forward, thrusting his makeshift cross towards the specter. "I compel you," he barks with authority. The fool is going to get himself killed. My prophecy is but a few inches from becoming reality, Gary's limbs quivering and stretching, his legs extending well beyond the length of his pants and into stilt-like proportions. He's about to leap forward, maw open to gulp down Thomas's head in one great bloody swallow when the door to the study bursts open. "Garrison Benedict Remington," Julia's voice cuts between piles of newspaper and shadows. "What is the meaning of this?" I've met cats and raccoons who weigh more than Julia Remington. On the universal scale of intimidation, the widow ranks somewhere between ladybugs and freshly mowed lawn. If she were an alcoholic beverage, she'd be a Shirley Temple, hold the grenadine. What I'm trying to say is that under any other circumstances, Julia Remington trying to browbeat anything but a glass of room temperature milk would be laughable. But there she is, admonishing this funhouse mirror version of her husband's ghost for being rude to the guests. And it reacts. In fact, we all do. Garrison, Thomas, and I all turn towards the widow Remington. The living among us do so in awe, but the apparition snarls and growls. I see it. For a moment, I see it. Fear in Julia's eyes. She stands there in the door to the study, dressed in black and clenching her shivering fists to underline her authority, but it's there. All the experiences she had mourning the death of her husband and taming his restless presence is etched in the subtext of her expression. The thing that Gary became hunches down, digging long fingernails into the floor. Though he's nothing but a vision, the fresh scores in the wooden planks are real. This ghost can kill. But Julia does the unthinkable and steps forward.
I'm giving you one chance, Gary,
she squeaks out, a failed attempt at further intimidation.
You leave them alone. We will talk about this tomorrow.
Uncowed, the specter pushes itself in her direction. The whole room seems to growl, as if we're already in the belly of Gary's ghost. As terrifying as the sound is, shaking me to the marrow of my bones, it's little compared to the hair-raising rumble that joins it. Lower, more guttural, and more importantly, more real. Oswald. The enormous gray velvet Great Dane paws slowly to its master's side. Fangs bared in warning, it steps between Julia and her dead husband, crouching low, ready to pounce. Poor Oswald. Does he know what he's up against? Does he realize the meat grinder of his jaw would mean nothing to the immaterial form he's confronting? It doesn't matter in the end. There's a long, almost interminable time while we watch dog and ghost stand off in the dark office. Gary illuminated by Thomas's flashlight and Oswald silhouetted by the corridor's light. For a moment, I wonder if we'll see the sun rising through the windows before there's any resolution to this showdown. And then, the office lights flicker back on, and with the darkness banished, so too is the ghost of Gary Remington. No puffs of smoke and smell of sulfur, no flickering of his presence and the cursing cry of his vanishing form. 1 minute he's there, and the next he's gone, as if his essence and that of the darkness were one. The only thing that remains of the ordeal are scratch marks on the floorboards and the crushed remains of an orange honey poppy seed cake. The drive back to the cafe is a quiet and solemn affair. It's rather a miracle that there's a drive back to the cafe at all. I can imagine many a scenario that would have prevented it. For one, I was very tempted to leave Remington Manor on foot. I wasn't going to get a ride from Julia, that's for sure, and the prospect of an hour in the cold, exhausting my anger with every step as I seethed towards the heart of Aquilo, seemed very attractive indeed. Another option, also attractive at the time, was to murder Thomas Sinclair right then and there. Depending on how long it would take for Detective Lamore to show up to arrest me, I might have gotten a ride to town that way. It sounds like I'm exaggerating, and I guess I am, but I don't think I've ever been so mad at someone since moving to Aquilo. Once in a while, during the 10-minute drive, Thomas turns towards me. His lips part, and I can see his mind tripping over itself to find something to say. A calmer, more level-headed Miriam Dufour might have seen the sentiment for what it is. A struggle to apologize for a terrible faux pas on a night like none other in his life. Tonight's Miriam doesn't want to hear a peep out of this man, and she makes it clear by the expression on her face. If there's any way to describe it, I'm set to broil, and I will gladly melt Thomas's face like so much cheese if he offers anything besides blessed silence. Either way, I'd much rather look outside the window than at his face. The night is beautiful. It's one of those typical Canadian nights like you get only a handful of times a year. Snowflakes the size of quarters float down in swarms, buffeted by light winds to send them dancing to the ground. Their swirls and twirls, along with the way they pick up any hint of moonlight, remind me of the Danselites. It's the kind of snow that swallows every hint of sound, the same way Gulliver devours every crumb that gets placed in front of him. Close to Christmas, this would be the perfect night to walk around the neighborhood, savoring the strings of colored lights and ornaments that adorn trees and the railings of porches. I remember a time when, in Montreal, Trevor and I took a walk around the plateau on a night like this. We marveled at inflatable Santas and blinking plastic icicles. It was magic. But that memory is tainted, and this night is corrupted as well. The only thing I can think of is how, by morning or before the weekend, this snowfall will be gone. Sour thoughts for a sour mood. The red El Camino stops in front of the ache willow. The warm glow from the dining room outlines the swirling roots and branches of the logo in the window. There's a Rockwall-esque fragrance to the sight of cozy heat framed by soft frost. It's peaceful, and I long for it so much I nearly step out of the car before it's fully stopped. "Hey," Thomas says as I open the door. "About tonight, no." I brandish my finger at him like a weapon, willing his mouth shut for once. There's so much I want to add to that. How I told him not to come, how I asked him to wait in the car. I want to pile so much blame on him that he collapses under the strain like an overburdened sponge cake. Instead, my finger waves at him again, demanding silence. His mouth opens, but through applied willpower, he shuts it again. I slam the door too hard and turn around, letting him leave without another word. Instead, I look through the ache willow's large window. I see Stefan doing his best impression of a customer service smile. I see the last few clients of the night, sipping their coffee and tea as they read and type on laptops. None of the kids from the Danselites are there, of course, but I see one of the cloud worshippers talking excitedly at a table with a woman who seems engrossed in the teachings. I wonder if they're chatting about Pilvinism or other more mundane things. It doesn't matter. What matters is that I'm standing outside my own cafe, feeling like I don't belong there. The ache willow is a peaceful haven tonight, and I'm jealous of its serenity, but not jealous enough to disturb it. The sound of my keyring bounces off the window and back to me as I pull it out. I glance through the front door at the welcoming chime, and I long for their song, but I settle for the single note of my apartment key as I pick it out of the rest. Even the corridors of my apartment feel wrong. Every shadow reminds me of the vision Gary Remington became when summoned forth by the wrong person. The smell of oranges and honey floats through the air, reminding me of the catastrophe of the evening. Most of all, the aggregate reminder brings to mind Julia's reaction to the ordeal. She wasn't mad. It's hard to imagine Julia Remington getting mad. The way she put her foot down to banish the spirit of her husband was about as assertive as I've seen her. But we robbed her of something tonight. From the outside, it's just some dumb cake. I can make her a fresh one tomorrow. No sweat. That would be missing the point, though. For over a year, the widow Remington has enjoyed weekly reminders of her beloved Gary and was, for that time, able to put away the memory of his haunting. Tonight, Thomas Sinclair brought all of that grief and fear flooding back. And for that, I don't know that I can forgive him. My kitchen welcomes me with the remnants of the last thing I prepared. That stupid cake. This should be my sanctuary, my temple, the place where I come to center myself. Instead, it's just more orange and honey and bad memories. Time for a cleansing. My hands are still shaky with frustration, and it's hard to focus. I want to bake, I want to cook, but I can't settle my mind on what to do. Fortunately, That's one riddle I know how to solve. On the counter, still open to the page with the poppy seed cake recipe, the cookbook left behind by Doris rests, waiting. With a loud clap, I slam the book shut. Tassels at the end of bookmarks shake with the impact. I lift the heavy book, enjoying its heft and the weight of potential it holds. "All right, my lovely leather-bound guide," I mumble. "Give me something distracting to make." With that, I drop the book back on the counter and flip open to a random page. The plan is to let luck, or Providence, decide on what recipe will help me banish the deeds of Thomas Sinclair and the associated mood so that I might get some semblance of a decent night's sleep. I land first on a page with a fancy illustration of a loaf of dark bread with icing and cranberries on top. A gingerbread loaf, written by Doris if I can trust the handwriting. Part of me can almost feel the soothing embrace of my dead great-grandaunt offering me this recipe as a comfort pick. Something easy and cozy and inviting. Tonight, however, I don't want cozy or inviting, and I certainly won't settle for easy. Tonight, I want to bite into a recipe. I want to fight my ingredients into submission and work my frustrations into something delicious. The book, or the ventilation, or perhaps just dumb luck, seems to read my thoughts and, picked up by a stray gust in an otherwise still kitchen, the page flips. Pfeffernussen. The word is scribbled atop a dog-eared page. There are no illustrations, and the ingredients and instructions look like they've been rage-written onto the paper. There are sigils scrawled into the margins, highlighting it as one of those recipes. But that doesn't matter. I'm not using the sigils, whatever they mean. All I want is something with teeth that I can wrestle into food. Pfeffernussen are perfect for my purposes. I've never made them. They're spicy, which allows me to get a little creative with the flavors. Best of all, they're cookies. If the batch I make tonight comes out any good, I can sell them at the cafe tomorrow. It's the perfect plan. The morning sees me refreshed, if not completely reset. There's still a burning anger deep in my stomach, where my coffee should be. But where last night it was sufficient to light up the ovens and demand something be cooked, today it's little more than an incandescent ember. It would not take much kindling for it to ignite again into a roaring flame, but for now, it's under control. I gotta say, as far as angry baking goes, the Pfeffernussen came out beautifully. 24 scrumptious little cookies sit in my display, waiting for customers to walk in and partake. I couldn't resist making a few adjustments to the recipe. I know it's a cardinal sin to modify ingredients to a recipe you've never prepared before, but sometimes the artist needs to put aside technical discipline in favor of abandon to the mood. In this case, it means I went heavy on the cinnamon, black pepper, and ginger while pulling back on the nutmeg and anise. They're subtle adjustments, and I doubt that the residents of Aquila are sufficient Pfeffernussen connoisseurs that they'll notice the difference. To most, these will be remembered as those spicy German cookies and nothing more. The important part is that they taste wonderful and have a kick to them. Who cares if the secret ingredient is hate? I flip the sign to the door to open and find myself almost buoyant at the prospect of a morning's work. Don't think I've forgotten about all the things that weigh on me. Seething anger at Thomas remains, but it also did not burn away my worry about Fred and Petunia's whereabouts. My best thinking, however, is done when my hands are occupied and my soul is at peace. Two things that are better achieved when I'm cooking or serving food. Well, the voice of Helen Edna, notary public, interrupts my morning preparations. Don't we have a spring in our step this morning? Do I ask, turning around to face the door. Helen is wearing a smart-looking navy blue wool coat and pulling off leather gloves one finger at a time, signifying that she's here for a while. I busy myself getting her a cup of coffee, wary that the machine's mood might not match my own, burning me in the process. I wouldn't say you're exactly bubbly, but you flip that sign with an amount of flair that's been absent for a while. I twist a dial and pull a lever, releasing a scalding jet of steam from the machine. Its gurgling and boiling sound like a threat, but so far without violence on its part. What's that supposed to mean? It means... She carefully drapes her coat over the back of one of the stools. You have a spring in your step. It reminds me of... Helen trails off, her attention drawn to my display. Her thin eyebrows arch and her eyes are like an abacus, clicking back and forth as she totals a tally of the contents. Ah, she resumes. You've been baking your troubles away. I put the cup of coffee in front of her, waiting to see if she'll allow herself a rare indulgence. Helen is someone whom I sometimes have difficulty remembering is human. She floats through town as if she, too, were but an apparition, or like she's in a box, always separated from the rest of us by a thin layer of transparent plastic. When we first met, I found that detachment intimidating. I still do, but now I recognize that it's the intellect that scares me, not the distance she keeps. She's someone who's very much capable of emotions. I just have to put her in a room with Gulliver to draw out the irritation, as an example. I've even been privy to a rare moment of sympathy from her. What I tend to forget is how perceptive she can be. Fine. I baked. I had a bad night and made cookies to cheer myself up. Now I'm cheered up. Here's your coffee. Helen nods her thanks and sits down, taking her sweet time pulling herself from the display. Without looking, she takes her cup by the handle, brings it to her lips, and takes a shallow, distracted sip. You're really making this your own, she says, still making a mental inventory of what she sees. The whole place. Every day it's a little less Doris and a little more you. The words almost sound like an accusation. No, wait, that's not fair. They sound like regret, or perhaps whatever it is that passes for sadness and nostalgia in Helen. You were the one who wanted me to stay. I put a smile on that reply, expecting her to do the same. Helen Edna, notary public, was insistent that if I wanted to take possession of the cafe, I had to also operate it. A strange clause left by Doris that took months to make any sense. The Aquilo Cafe is far more than just a piece of property and a business. It's a legacy and a responsibility. And Helen knows that better than most. She answers with far less vim than I thought she might. I suppose I did, didn't I? Are those German cookies? She sounds disappointed. Not in the cookies, but in me. It's like there's something in my behavior that doesn't live up to her expectations. I'm about to launch into an awkward, stuttering mess of a question in the hopes of digging to the core of that suspicion when the chimes to the cafe sing their song. If I didn't know any better, I'd start thinking that they do so on purpose to interrupt whenever I have something important to say. Although a little scuffed by my sudden doubt in Helen's approval, I'm still riding high on my bout of nightly cooking, and I slap on my best 6 a.m. customer service smile. I turn to greet my new client, expecting perhaps Michael or Pat, or maybe even Ian here to claim his croissant. That would be the most fortuitous, as I have questions for him that could help me understand what happened to Fred and Petunia. My smile melts like butter in a hot pan. I can almost hear it sizzle as it drips down my face. Miriam. Thomas freaking Sinclair. He strides into my cafe without even the most basic respect of looking sheepish. I baked German cookies because of him. What could possibly be more angry than German cookies? The least he could do is come in later and look a little guilty. Or better yet, not come in at all. What are you doing here? The question seems to confuse him for half a second, but he recovers quickly and obliviously. Oh, yes. I'll take a cup of coffee, orange juice, and... He trails off, walking over to the display. A cheese croissant and 2 of those cookies with the icing sugar on them. I would have poisoned the Pfeffernussen if I'd known that Thomas was going to be ordering some. But because I'm a good hostess and a good person and... Who am I kidding? A bit of a pushover when it comes to people enjoying my food. I dutifully put the croissant and cookies on a plate for him. With his usual self-centered mannerism, Thomas takes off his coat and hangs it on his stool. He then carefully puts down his notebooks, phone, and an old portable tape recorder. Having the entirety of the Aquilo at his disposal, any of a dozen tables and half a dozen stools at the counter, he sits right next to Helen Edna. And she looks at him like he's a particularly nasty slug crawling up on his seat because of it. But she lets it go, focusing on her coffee and study of my behavior instead. I spend the time it takes to prepare the rest of Thomas's order, making his coffee and retrieving his orange juice from the kitchen, trying to figure out a subtle way to ask Helen what's up with her this morning. But by the time I'm back at the counter, there are clients waiting for me. First, it's Michael and Pat, both of which are deep into an argument about whether this year's first snow is earlier or later than previous years. Then Mayor Byrne and Lagacé drop by and order a large quantity of pastries, something about being the birthday of someone's assistant at City Hall. Before long, I'm serving a dozen customers, filling in orders and braving the coffee machine to get everyone their breakfast. It's the kind of busy I truly enjoy, and it looks like I'll be running out of Pfeffernussen long before lunch. Everyone who has a bite makes a point to compliment the taste, but not without mentioning that they have an unusual zing to them. "Oh," Michael says after a nibble, "those'll wake you up, won't they?" Already, my brain is hard at work, compiling ideas for another variation of the cookie. A breakfast Pfeffernussen, if you will. What could I add to them? Coffee? Candied bacon? I fill a coffee pot and start to warm everyone's cup, starting with the counter. Helen puts a polite hand over hers, even though I already know she's a 1 cup per morning kind of person. I'm about to fill Thomas's cup when I notice a particular paleness to his face. He's chugging the last few drops of his orange juice like the vitamin C is the only thing that could save his life. "What's in that?" he snaps, pulling the cup away so fast I splash coffee all over my counter. "Coffee," I snap right back. "It's coffee, Thomas. If you don't want any, you can just say so." His tiny blue eyes jerk back and forth between his cup and my pot before settling on the spilled puddles cooling between us. He looks at the brown stains like he's trying to read them, or he's worried they might come to life and strike at him. Thomas is weird on any given day, but right this minute, he's unsettling. "You okay there?" I ask, trying to get a pulse on his situation, but still refusing to be friendly about it. "You." He pulls his cup even closer to himself. "You're trying to poison me. Oh, but I'm on to you." "What are you talking about? It's coffee. See?" I tilt the pot towards him so he can look for himself, but he recoils from it like one would from a cobra. No. You're trying to get revenge on me for what happened at the mansion. No, wait. You drugged me. You drugged me when we went to that widow's home. I know it. I bet she was in on it, too. I bet it's still in my blood. Manic and crazed, his eyes dart around the counter. The skin on his face is pale but covered in red blotches that look feverish. His forehead is covered in a sheen of sweat and his hands are shaking, spilling more coffee from the cup in his hands. "Thomas," I say, putting the pot down and reaching out to him. "Something's wrong with you." Like a snake, his hand grabs onto the butter knife I gave him with his croissant. He brandishes it towards me first, then turns the dull blade to his forearm. "Yes," he barks. "Something's very wrong. It's in my blood. The drugs. They made me hallucinate that ghost. The poison. It's in my blood, and I'm going to get a sample." And with that, Thomas Sinclair stabs his wrist with a butter knife in my cafe. Aquilo is written by J.F. Dubow and narrated and produced by me, Amy Frost. If you enjoyed this podcast and would like to hear more, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or your preferred podcast platform. Want to support the show? Buy us a coffee. Go to ko-fi.com/Aquilo to donate. Aquilo has a Patreon. Visit patreon.com/Aquilo for details. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram under the username Aquilo.